Good morning. It is an exciting morning today because the poet of the day is none other than George Orwell, born Eric Arthur Blair in 1903, died in 1950. He was an English novelist, essayist, journalist, and critic who wrote under the name George Orwell. His work is characterized by lucid prose, social criticism, opposition to totalitarianism, and support of democratic socialism. I have loved Orwell my whole time that I've ever known of him, and I just really am so excited to be able to explore Orwell this morning. I had decided that I was going to use him as my poet today because I started reading his memoir, Homage to Catalonia, last night. And I read the first two chapters and I love it. And I didn't know if he actually was a poet at that point. And I was going to just say, well, we're going to look at Homage to Catalonia instead of a poem because it's just as beautiful and important. But so when I did that, I realized later this morning I looked up his poetry and I realized that he actually has written some poems that are findable on the internet. And so they didn't include that in his Wikipedia entry, but oh yeah, they do. It's right there. He about how he wrote poetry. Well, so we're going to do some of those this morning too. Orwell produced literary criticism, poetry, fiction, and polemical journalism. He is known for the allegorical novella Animal Farm, and the dystopian novel 1984. And I've read both of those. I'm sure a lot of you have too. His nonfiction works, including The Road to Wigan Pier, documenting his experience of working class life in the industrial north of England, and Homage to Catalonia, an account of his experience soldiering in for the Republican faction of the Spanish Civil War, were as critically respected as his essay on politics, literature, language, and culture. Born in India, Blair was raised and educated in England from when he was 1 year old. After school, he became an imperial policeman in Burma before returning to Suffolk, England, where he began his writing career as George Orwell, a name by a favorite location, the River Orwell. He made a living from occasional pieces of journalism and also worked as a teacher or a bookseller while living in London. So, from the late 1920s to the early 1930s, his success as a writer grew, and his first books were published. He was wounded fighting in the Spanish Civil War, leading to his first period of ill health on return to England. During the Second World War, he served as a sergeant in the Greenwich Home Guard, worked as a journalist between 1941 and 1943, worked for the BBC. The 1945 publication of Animal Farm led to fame during his lifetime. So, during his final years, he worked on 1984 and moved to London and the Scottish island of Jura. So he published 1984 and 1949, less than a year before his death. this poet, this writer, George Orwell, he wrote, I love Homage to Catalonia, and um, I will start with one of his poems, though. It's called A Little Poem. A happy vicar I might have been 200 years ago to preach upon eternal doom and watch my walnuts grow. But born, alas, in an evil time, I miss that pleasant haven. For the hair was grown on my upper lip, and the clergy are all clean shaven. And still, and later still, the times were good. We were so easy to please. We rocked our troubled thoughts to sleep on the bosom of the trees. All ignorant, we dared to own the joys we now disassemble. The green finch and the apple bough could make my enemies tremble. But girls' bellies and apricots roach in a shaded stream. Horses, ducks in flight at dawn. All these are a dream. Is it forbidden to dream again? We maim our joys or hide them. Horses are made of chromium steel, and little fat men shall ride them. I am the worm who never turned, the eunuch without a harem. Between the priests or the commissar, I walk like Eugene Aram. And the commissioner is telling my fortune while the radio plays. And the priest has promised an Austin 7, for Dougie always pays. I dreamt I dwelt in marbled halls and woke to find it true. I wasn't born for age like this. Was Smith, was Jones, were you? So he wasn't born for an age like this. I love that. He sure wasn't. He was way ahead of his times, as maybe other people are. I loved Homage to Catalonia. And I was trying to decide what I might try to read of it, despite not being a traditional poem. It is a memoir. But I decided I'm not going to read the whole first chapter. I'm going to read the first line from the book to start. That'll be the first thing I read. Chapter 1. In the Lenin barracks in Barcelona, the day before I joined the militia, I saw an Italian militiaman standing in front of the officer's table. So in case you ever wondered how it opens, that is how it opens. And here is one of the favorite lines that I obtained from reading it, the first two chapters. This is a quote you could use, I guess. Human beings were trying to behave as human beings and not as cogs in the capitalist machine. And then he went on to write, it seemed dreadful that the defenders of the Republic should be this mob of worn out children carrying rifles which they did not know how to use. So that might make you interested in what's going to happen in that. It sure makes me. I definitely am reading that very soon, the rest of it. All right. George Orwell, wrote an essay with poems in it. It was a critical essay called Nonsense Poetry. So I'm not going to read that one, but you might look it up if you're interested in nonsense poetry, because there's a rich tradition of nonsense poetry. So I think I'll close with his poem because it's morning when I'm putting this out. Awake, young men of England. Oh, give me the strength of the lion, the wisdom of Reynard the fox. And then I'll hurl troops at the Germans and give them the hardest knocks. Oh, think of the warlord's mailed fist. That is striking at England today. And think of the lives of the soldiers, are fearlessly throwing away. Awake, O you young men of England, for if, when your country is needed, you do not enlist by the thousands, you truly are cowards indeed. So I guess he was not a pacifist at all, because he himself did fight in the revolution in Spain, and um, he's saying a line that is very strong there to me. The one that was strong to me isn't it isn't you truly are cowards indeed. The one that really got me was um, fearlessly throwing away. And think of the lives that our soldiers are fearlessly throwing away. Fearlessly throwing lives away and choosing to do it so as not to be cowards. That's interesting to think about from my perspective, from where I've come from. Well, have a beautiful day and see you tomorrow for another poet.